Okay. Yay. And I will admit our guest. Welcome to the 34th reading in the Speculative Sundays reading series and the 4th reading in Starburst, our special series celebrating Women's History Month. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. I'm Akua Leslie Hope, speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors, by whose grace I exist and am sustained. This event is funded in part by poets and writers with public funds from the New York State Council of the Arts with support of the New York State Legislature. This reading is being recorded, so if you've got concerns, please don't use your image. We're here to hear speculative poetry, the poetry of possibilities, and it includes alternate history, cryptids, monsters, cyberpunk, dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, mythology, occult, paranormal, robots, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, space opera, superhero, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and it takes all poetic forms plus one of its own called sci-fi coup. When I think about the history of women in speculative poetry, I think about Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, which I read as a very young person, and Emily Dickinson, who also inspired me so much in elementary school, both writing before the 20th century. Imagine that. It's a long history. Now let me introduce, if this paper will relent. It's not, it doesn't want to relent. There we go. Let me introduce today's wonderful poet. Sherese Francis is an alchemist of the I-Magination and expresses herself through poetry, interdisciplinary arts, workshop facilitation, editing, and literary curation. Her work takes inspiration from her Afro-Caribbean heritage, Barbados and Dominica, and studies in Afrofuturism and Black speculative arts, mythology, and etymology. Some of her work has been published in Furious Flower, Obsidian, Apex Magazine, Bone, Bouquet, African Voices, and Newtown Literary. Additionally, Sherese has published 3 chapbooks: Lucy's Bone Scrolls from Three-Legged Elephant, Variations on Sett ling, Seed ling, Harlequin Creature, and Recycling a why that rules over my sacred site. DoubleCross Press. Welcome, Sherese.
Thank you, Akua, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. I will also like to say I am in Queens on Lenape-Lakawe land, and thank you for the invitation to read for Women's History Month. Although I identify as non-binary, a lot of my work is influenced by Black women and Black feminist writings as well. So to start off, I will be reading a poem that was inspired by Harriet Tubman. It's called She Who Is in the Image of God, and it was published in Literary for their Mom Egg folio. So she who is the image of God. There's a holiness that she carries in her hands, like a Moses budding a kaleidoscope of butterflies, fluttering to freedom. She crafts with a mother tongue, whispering in her body, a code of thrones in trees and herbs. Her hips are a lotus blossoming from the mud. She tends a garden of marigolds with the dirt from her grave. She carries a storehouse of rice in her hair, and on her journey made a jambalaya constellation to direct her people home. Oh, the glory of her fractured sun radiating through our bodies. We wear the many colors of her skins, wash our feet in her sweat as she dances with roots and rituals of resistance. Oh, to know home is to see yourself in her image, is to divine a mirror of her beauty, is to crown yourself with her spiraling wisdom, is not to be afraid of her presence, but to know she has always been. So that's the first poem. This next poem was inspired by me reading the essay from Rene Descartes, who came up with the phrase, I think, therefore I am. And I had recently read work from Audre Lorde, and this was the quote: "The white fathers told us, I think, therefore I am. The Black mother within each of us, the poet, whispers in our dreams, I feel, therefore I can be free." So this poem, and it has a very long title, it's called Theory of My Minds. I having a conversation with myself, having a conversation with Descartes, having a conversation with himself, meditations with enlightenment and freedom. And just a little note, it's a letter poem, and I begin with renature because Rene's name, the root of his name means to renatus, which means to rebirth. So I call him renature. Dear renature, who is God in the eye of the beholder? I can never catch myself in a flowing river. Ground zero is where new paths of unmapped territory are found. Is there a God? If so, does God deceive? You need a lot of makeup remover. What is intimacy? What I think of you will die. What I think of myself will die. Hint, the self dies all the time. Define the ripple effect. It is yourself always broken open and red. What is the correlation between the depth of self and the depth of image? Self-preservation can be the same as self-ignorance, aka what sank the Titan or Titanic. Deluge or delusion, definition, tumbling around in a deep whirlpool. I have fallen and I'm not sure I want to get out. Who is the father of science, psychology, philosophy? Your thoughts are not my thoughts. Classification and authority, a fabrication of certainty. The wise say they love their mother and her big pot. Is there one immovable point to shift the earth? I have a distorted sense of the world. You pushed me off balance. It is my form of adaptation. Do memories lie? My body, my shape, my place, my movement, my extended self is a chimera. Call it compounded matter, AKA, it's complicated. Is this life a dream? As long as I conceive of the idea that nothing has happened, it has. The consequences of construction. Even fiction has its own rules. Then distinguish reality from fantasy. I overthink others' reactions to me. How do you know that's me? Sorry, my mind is prone to err. What is thought? What is rationality? What is man? What is animal? Self-movement is a question of relationships and reflections. Pull my string, or is it my leash? Then what is intellect? A tower of Babel or Babel. Oh, I got it. Experimentation of the experience of environment and embodiment. Or how about this? The emotional limit as it approaches words and equipment. Do you mind that I put us at risk by reading beneath the surface? I'm gathering evidence. When something changes, is it still itself? What do you think I am? I'd like to remember myself as I was. I mean, I am. I mean, will be. I mean, what I am not. You know what I mean. Is God a he? Does God look like me? If so, then I don't exist. Is seeing believing? Only with selective attention. By the way, I'm over here. Am I somebody or just deceived? I can only make judgments about things that are known to me and things I am still unaware. I am a thinking thing. I in a stable. Nay. Is I dependent on what I invent? What use is imagination if I can't cover myself up? I am missing a puzzle piece. What's the big picture? I think I am, so I exist. Please tell me I matter. I heard in the dark outer space, you are weightless because no external force of contact is there to hold you. I wish I could fall for you. What is the nature of the human mind? My body is angry that you don't listen to it. Signed, Return. And so that's the conversation I had with Descartes based off of his essay. So the next poem.
Wow, I just had to say, wow. I dug it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
The next poem was inspired by Dr. Josephine English, who was one of the first Black women OBGYNs in the country. And one of my friends, Tanisha Carrington, they are doing a documentary based off of her life and asked me to do a poem in honor of her. So this poem is called Black Hum Othering Experiments or In Time Acts, a Black Wholeness. And just a little note on Dr. Josephine English, her favorite color was blue. And I mentioned a loophole of retreat in the poem, which references Harriet Jacobs and her slave narrative, in which she mentions the loophole of retreat as a place where she could go to find freedom. And a loop is also a magnifying device as well. So this quote about Dr. Josephine English. She loved people, real people, and she did what she could to create opportunities so that people could uplift themselves. She was an icon in Brooklyn history and was concerned that young people were not being taught about the contributions of the great people around them, whose shoulders they stand on. Act 1, Instruments. Loophole of retreat, speculum, retractor, and sapphire lens. Sometimes it causes me to tremble. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. I have, I have asked myself, what do I do with my silenced anger? Dismissed with the dregs of the past that have settled on my body, I have watched the river come and go, and with what it has left, I form the instruments I have now to look within. Standing in between, immersed in a narrow opening that can birth something possible. I've witnessed the cries that have projected out. I have felt the desire to have a space of one's own, a welcoming, the magnification of the body. How do I reconstruct time in a narrow opening, hold time within my grasp, hold its gravities, its possibilities unmeasurable? Doctor, daughter, theater. A view of the body, a hanging veil of skin, a swinging pendulum of hips, a web of threads telling a story, a collection of waving energy out of the mouth. In its entire motioning into being, someone is heard, someone is seen. In its opening, a revelation, a moment of peace, a sanctuary, a reconstruction, the strength to draw oneself into being. Going home, going home, I'll be going home. See the light, see the sun. I'm just going home. Act 2, credit to mothers of gynecology. What is the value of a Black other's life? Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. Doctor, daughter, theater, from the Congo to Virginia, the mining of the earth and the body without credit or compensation, the body scripted as fractured, and the violator is now given the role of doctor, praised as savior. Vesico-vaginal fistula, abnormal connections between hollow spaces, death of tissue from the stress of the body, the spaces squeezed, preventing flow, preventing the body from seeing itself. The body is forced open after repeated violations. The body is struggling to give birth. The body looked at as a problem to fix, to quickly stitch back together with silver wire sutures. But there is a nebulous gathering around the wound, a history of rape, of forced labor, of a lack of care, the new knowledge gained at the expense of the old. I once had a marble fall between my bed and my drawer into a crack of space. I reached my hand down and was still able to find it. There was somewhere for the marble to land. Endometrial. I reach my hand inside time to find a knowledge already in existence, buried within bodies of time. Refocus the magnification to these names, these spaces claim, these bodies as openings to science. Delia Boudurant, Lavinia, Anne McRee, Julia McDuffie, Betsy, Lucy. Anarcha Westcott. Here where her body rests is where I was born, from the Congo to Virginia. Before I was given a speculum, a practice, a body, this nebulous gathering, the power of an unfamiliar familiar, a community as a center, myself as a center, the body as a center, this holy space as a center, a magnification in a narrow space. Where I was born is where a space was founded, is where I reconstructed, supplanted his role as doctor, his examinations of time. My hands and eyes are lovers. They have taken the role of maroon from the bitterness of what they have witnessed, of the fractures made in the body, to the act of birthing love. An investigator questioning the source of violations that have silenced the sounds of organs resonating within the core of life, the wholeness. A nebulous gathering, a movement forward cannot be fixed to a problem to fix. It is a being to love. Steal away home. I ain't got long to stay here, my lord. He calls me by thunder, the trumpet sounds within my soul. I ain't got long to stay here. Act 3, speculum into a dwelling space. The body is beyond objectivity. Old woman river, she must know something, but don't say nothing. She just keeps rolling. She just keeps rolling along. Doctor, daughter, theater is a teacher. I do not find hope in only the observations of the mind that are not also the audience to the body. I've learned how to ground within the bending of rivers. The movement is the technique, is the medicine. Here where her body rests is where I was born. Anarcha, Virginia, thrown away and left calling in the desert of America. You are heard. I heard you. Let your name be a new birthing, a new science, a new politic. A woman who takes the body into her own hands, found herself in the wandering away from the old roles. I am a deliverer. I am your kin. I know you in this act in time. I am a listener to the calling. I am a servant to the mystery. I am a mastery of myself in search of a dwelling space. I am offering all of my worth to this trajectory of a direction where these many impulses reach from this narrow crack, passes light and breath, passes unheard stories through an opened mouth. The fracturing eye will turn into strength, resistance, a sapphire material, a othering lasting through time, a knowing residing between a hostile land and hospitality, a continued welcoming, a space to be able to move, to draw oneself into being by gathering the ground around the foundation of a question. I am a question dancing in this dwelling space, a speculation of what was declared as impossible. I am one who was never meant to survive, never meant to know about my own body, but I chose to magnify my body so I could see myself. Contraction, dilation, anterior repair. Where can a Black mother be of value? A space where she can move her entire body forward, to go wherever, to do whatever, to speak whatever, to be whatever, to be magnified in the welcoming of her body. Adelphi. That's the end of that poem.
Lovely.
I don't know how much time I have.
You have another 12 minutes.
Okay, so I'm gonna read this last poem because it's a very long poem as well. This poem is inspired by 3 different people. Nina Simone's 4 Women and the first woman, Aunt Sarah, Sarah Bartman, who was known to be paraded around in Europe because of her body. She had a large behind, and so Europeans gawked at it. And so she was also experimented on her body by his name is Dr. Cuvier, so he gets a mention as well. And the other Sarah is Sarah Mapps Douglas, who had an interest in mineralogy, and she had a cabinet full of rocks and shells and stones. So this is Aunt Sarah, the process of storage or place of exchange, or Sarah's pedagogical panorama. And this will be the first poem in a series of poems based off of Nina Simone's song. Microscopic ship, Black women things. Sarah's notes at the Gilbert Lyceum to a Museum of Humanity. Sarah Bartman. What can science, before I begin, this is what I consider a quantum entanglement poem. So Sarah Bartman and Sarah Mapps Douglas are speaking to each other across time and space. Okay. Sarah Bartman. What can science, having my body, tell us in the future? Is it the past? What is on display besides my body? The potential of science and what it can never tell us? Does history have a founding mother in science? What is found in an anatomized Black woman's body? Is my body an observation, a symbol, an object of fascination? Am I a caricature of knowledge masking colonial capital? Who has woven me into this monstrous entanglement? Do I represent my own preservation in this galvanization of curiosity? Do I alone need to explain why I am here? This too, written here, is an object of fascination. Sarah Mapps Douglas. Monograph. A writing or exhibition on the deep study of a specific subject by a single author or artist. Me. I am fascinated by nature around me, the environments that shape my presence here now. I say to act right, you must feel deeply. I feel this pen in my hand as I draw my observations, as if my body is a sensor for the motions of time. I am fascinated by flowers. When I was in New York, I once heard about a 16-year-old Khoi girl named Flora on display at one of P.T. Barnum's shows. Sarah, click. Hear that sound? Do you know who made that sound? Maybe me, maybe the river. I live near what is now called Gamtoos. Maybe my people. Kwa, kwa. Who defines what it means to be human? I've also heard Nama, Damara, Orama, Gara, Hagar. I could go on. Every name given to me dismembers me. Click. Others hear my sounds as a stammering, stuttering. Sun, sand, sand, sand. I've been trying to give shape to what I know, collecting time into myself. When I was young, I used to gather the silt by the mouth of the river, hold it in my hands, kneading this pounded earth, it clinging between my fingers, try to turn it into something. Sarah. I am fascinated by the earth and have theorized on it too. I've heard the names, mineralogy, geology, Cuvier called the founding father of paleontology. I am learning the capacity to hold the layering of history in a body. I too know what it's like to hold some of the earth in my hands and try to shape it. Once I wrote in my private journals about forget-me-nots. Slavery was an abstracted terror in my readings and writings until it came knocking on my front door. So I gathered collections and attentions for the liberator. I am fascinated by the rhythms of those like my grandfather Cyrus, who founded their way to freedom. I am an observer of uprootings and replantings. Sarah, I've been gathering whatever pieces of myself I can find to remember into some timepiece this moment. Click. This small tortoise shell necklace for my mother before she left me. The image of my father herding cattle before he left me. I met Caesar and was hired to nurse his family. I lost mine. I am trying to remember those drummers' hands wrapped around mine, the sounds that filled my body, my womb now empty, my milk for another. I find myself imagining new attachments, new garments to clothe myself. Click, Sarah. Do you want to hear what I know about shells, rocks, minerals, fossils? Like our bones, the ground will remember in its own ways. Shells and minerals, well arranged and labeled. In this, my own cabinet of curiosity, like this mind of mine richly furnished with a knowledge beyond these sciences. Do you know about lithodomes, about mollusks, compressed bodies that make their home in limestone? I have hidden my works, this language of flowers between covers of albums, sealed in envelopes of private letters, stored in attics and archives in names like Zilla and Sophonisba. My mother has invited me to teach at her school, founded with a cell maker named Fortin. I'm still trying to give a name to all the ways this body of mine has been compressed, all the arrangements of these workings within me, these workings carrying me away to something else. Sarah, what parts of me can I keep private? Men have always been curious of my mind, of my body, so much so I have been fossilized, dissected and pickled in jars, Cuvier, remember? So-called foundation of anatomy. These lithographs ridicule my form. I am opened up by time, made to receive another's compression, an emptied vessel for another's placements, as if I wasn't holding histories in me already, as if I didn't draw my own observations of my anatomy while dancing my feet on the ground of my homeland, of these stages, each move I make a printing, a cultivation of my body's intelligence. Click, Sarah. To gaze at a flower is not to see it, a love that is surface only. Your reflection in its nature, your desire for sweetness, for beauty, for some sense of normal. At her expense, a body withering from neglect. Do you hear that sound? The wail of a captive somewhere in the cloudy mist, lurking at the shore of this rose-colored happiness. My feelings on the subject has found a weak point, has opened me up to a hypothesis. What's under skin to what's underground? I am accounting for something deeper, a pain we are all carrying. Sarah. The foundation of this sympathy is the same as the roots of that pathology, roots of all our suffering. Click, Hottentot, hot-tot, an entanglement hung up on display, a monster of nature, an object of fascination, a net to catch attraction and repulsion. A freak show named Hottentot, swinging these beads and feathers around me like something beyond this nature. Objectified oracle for sapient animalism, I respond to commands of attraction and repulsion, an oscillation on a field of normal, like these swinging beads and feathers hanging from my body a function of scaring away the, do you hear that sound? The heaviness of gravity. You can't Venus? Why not? Play our game, they say, so I be. A beauty of speech, a click of the tongue, time dissected, an optical phenomenon presented to you by the showman Caesar and the ship surgeon Dunlop. Attention and anatomy and the performance of body transported in a query, a reconstruction, like I once heard of an ancient river craft written as a computer. Sarah. With this cabinet of curiosity, I too am a naturalist. I am fascinated by nature around me. I know the function of the tools to examine these specimens in my grasp, to familiarize myself with technical language, minerals cleavage, the tendency to break along smooth planes, the point of weakness where a structure breaks. Instrument for mineral analysis. I'm familiarizing myself with an instrument for breakage. Another one, goniometer, a device that measures an angle or permits the rotation of an object to a definition, to a position, measures the directions and intersections of signals, measures the locations along a field of normal, measures the landscape to locate specimens to gather together, measures the angles between points of visibility, measures the spatial distribution of what's visible to the human eye, measures the angles between faces of a crossing, measures the range of motion at a joint, measures one's ability to move, measures how severe the injury, measures the internal twisting and turnings of a body that reveals itself on the body, measures the angle at which to cut. To understand all the ways cutting is possible. The angle of a blade, like how to unhinge oneself from this skeletal display to show that something supposedly immobile, when moved, moves with the fracturing of light, like surface science. What changes in the contact, that tension that now exists, attraction, repulsion, demonstration, definition. I don't know if I ran out of time, so I don't know if I should stop there.
No, don't stop. Finish, please.
Okay, finish. Okay, thank you. Okay, Sarah. Arriving from the interior of Africa, I am flattened to this definition. Bushman, the smooth plane of the hospital stage is where I am crossed over. Capital circulation masquerading as scientific interest, transported to Piccadilly Circus. Circulation punctured, picado, staccato, the large collar of classification around the neck, the clinging dirt of passerby and onlookers, the iron hand stretched forth to seize me as his prey, as his definition, as civilized. Intricate cuttings formed into caricature prints, the magnification of the behind's enormous size. I am fabricated as blue comedy, as Dada art, as artificial intelligence, a covering up the body by warping it into a costume of capital circulation, into colonial dismemberment, a lineage contracted into display. I'm a spectacle picked and poked at with walking sticks with fingers. Am I a fabricated foundation, digital reproduction? Am I a body as the definition of first human? What remains were buried, skeletal, skull, scriptings of genetics on Cuvier's display. But the organ of my mouth is missing by a scalpel hand heading an African institution. I am translated to a query by Macaulay's liberating patronizing of a trafficked body when he has his iron hands around Africa's neck, when his hands knead into currency a larger system hidden under the screen of curiosity, an erotic projection, missing link between man and beast. And I, like all of your animal specimen, I needed to eat to live. How is this body translated, warped into capital, bustled into this mass-produced, I've come to take you home, still in a political negotiation, I am contained in another's theorizing. I am positioned to center focus on what's behind this enormous mass I carry. Sarah. The cause of the enslaved has become my own. I perform as token in a medical institution to learn anatomy, physiology, the female form. I'm still navigating the entanglement between survival, agency, and respectability, a definition of objectification. I know what they will say. Look here at this specimen. I do not see my form in their books, so I improvise. I look at myself. I familiarize myself with my aged spirits, oscillating back and forth within my own container. I hear about the name Cuvier in my studies, his menagerie of interpretation of what remains, interpreting what's between my legs, an object of fascination, theorizes this body as close to apes to codify a hierarchy of races. He doesn't believe in evolution. You are what you are, he says. My ears are not an instrument he is familiar with. My movements are a measurement he can't understand, sees it as a quickening process like a signifying monkey. I read in a record he once wrote, a woman like me was intelligent with an excellent memory, a flowing tongue, a back and arms and feet and hands that were full of grace. I would have said, playing the twisting instrument in my mouth, it's all from learning how to carry an enormous mass behind you. Now to end with the two Sarahs coming together. Sarah, the name of the specimen of a flower, is also the name of a scientist. We are carried within a query. Where you transition is where I begin. Love is the recognition of the sharing of this entanglement, the truth breathing the same air and atmosphere that shaped us both. Something old, something far, far back, some door to return to. Am I not your sister? Your name, my name, a token of love for me to thee. Black butterfly on the edge of a twig, the suspension of our current being, anticipating the motion to somewhere else. Like the tips of our fingers, our feet, our bodies, we have arranged ourselves into a beauty of flight. These wings behind us flash a color of some other name. Our pen illustrates an image of ourselves, unclassified. We wander around searching to belong, to be seen in ways we have not been, like when a flower droops its head towards the ground. The only way to discern its inner beauties, its angularities, its instrumentation is to look beyond the scope of the eye of the observer. And that's the end of the poem.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you.
I loved the leaps through time and linkages. But as you read, I thought of so many other linkages. And there's one that just jumped out at me before I get to other questions, because I want to comment on this. I I thought of two things. Number one, I thought of how um, British women in particular, but then European women
Mm,
changed their fashion
mm,
based on Sarah Bartman's body,
mhm,
which I never knew until I knew the story of Sarah Bartman, looked at the time, thought about it, and then found someone else who had articulated it totally. And I
mhm,
think you referenced that in passing, but that just needs to be spotlighted. When we see those women um, put those bustles on and have those um those strange clothings where they're pushed up in the front and
mm,
jutted out in the back, but these are appendages that they have to acquire.
mm,
This is all from seeing this Black woman's body. It blew their ever-loving minds
mhm,
such that their fashion changed
mhm,
to respond to this. And
mm,
it's not, and I love how you tease out the response isn't necessarily healthy, but
mm,
it is a response. It
mm,
is a recognition of a something greater and beyond.
mhm,
Sadness is that the colonial imagination is so constrained and so tied up with its own mythology that supports its domination, that it can't just embrace the beauty, and yet it sees the beauty anyway. And
mm,
and so I adore the poem for threshing through that, for teasing that out.
mhm,
But then also what you do in this work, unlike the other works, which variously, um, not of your works, but other people who have examined this, variously decry it or just celebrate her, you give her a, a connection that reaches from the then through a closer to now, so
mhm,
that, you give her a home going, you give her um, respite
mhm,
for what was obviously torture. So
mhm,
I mean, I thank you for that. That was so lovely and moving, and that you took your time to explore this bit by bit, along with what's also the pain of being a first,
mhm,
having lived through you, again, I'm centuries later, and that I still have first is not a matter of pride, it's a matter of sorrow, as we talked a bit about before we began. It's like, why should I be the first to enter any room at this point in time? And
mhm,
so the idea of Dr. English, how lonely those studies had to have been
mhm.
being the first,
Yeah,
right?
it's because I just did a because I'm also working on a poetry radio project, and I just did a tribute to Phyllis Wheatley as well, and I spoke of
Mm,
how being the first is also a failure of an environment, that you
absolutely.
the first. And so a lot of my work is also thinking about that and how that is a tool of colonization and this kind of objectifying of like, you need to be the first, as if we don't have a history and a lineage of people who have done those things and have built the knowledges that are in Western science right now, right? Western science doesn't come out of nowhere.
Nowhere.
Right? Like we've been like the entirety of humanity has been building those knowledges. They're not
In terms of the American experiment, Phyllis isn't the first.
Mhm.
First is Jupiter Hammond, who was in Queens, by the way, not far from you. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I heard about him like only a couple of years ago. as well. And I didn't know about that either. But like every day I'm discovering this other person who was also part of that history that has been buried or repressed or
Right,
out. Yeah.
right. Like, why didn't we learn about him in elementary school in Queens,
Hmm.
as other people learn about their local heroes?
Right.
And he, at the end of his life, wrote some really profoundly um, dramatic stuff saying this institution is terrible, and how can you consider yourself a Christian and enslave people, which
Hmm.
was very, and he was never freed, by the way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I didn't mean to go there with that because I want to talk about it's that's the richness of your work, folks. That's the richness of her work. And there's not a lot of time, but there are some questions that I need her to answer about herself so we know a little bit more about her. Like, when did you start writing?
Hmm.
And yeah, and what inspires you?
Yeah, so I started writing like around 10 years old because growing up, I was always a quiet child. And so writing kind of helped me to get out what was going on in my mind because I was just dealing with a lot of stuff. And I'm the type of person who's very observant and always taking things in. So I needed a way to kind of organize all of that in my head. So writing helped me to do that. And what was the second question?
What inspires you?
What inspires me? Life in general. Like I said, I'm observant, and so I'm always trying to pay attention to the world around me and take notes and let that kind of lead me into other things. I love going on tangents and I love doing research. So like if an idea pops into my head, I'll research that word and then I'll whatever pops up about that, I'll start researching about that and I'll go down like rabbit holes and all of it will form into like the work that I have now. That's why my work is just filled with so much stuff because like I just go on rabbit holes regularly.
That's beautiful. And it's a great way to keep learning and to keep evolving. Um, when you started writing at 10, did you consider yourself a writer? Was that something formal? Is it something that was sustained? Did school sustain it? Okay.
Um, yeah, I wrote throughout middle school and high school and college as well. For college, I actually created my own major that was a mix of music and creative writing because I love music.
I'm so glad you mentioned music. Was going to ask about it. Please speak more about music. Yes.
Yeah, so like music has always kind of inspired my work because I love thinking about sound. In my bio, I mentioned that etymology also influences my work. And
We
so,
hear it in your work. We
yes,
hear your attention to
yes,
sound in your work.
yeah. So I love breaking words down and playing with sound and thinking about how when we hear a word, the different ways you can hear a word. And so music helps me to think about that. One of my favorite groups is Parliament Funkadelic. And, and they inspire a
From
lot.
my time.
But they're thinking about like language and science fiction. It
Yes.
really inspires my work. That so like I was always writing. And then after college, I started kind of doing more self-study. So I would
Mm.
constantly read, constantly be researching about various poets and writing and submitting to different journals, and then just continue to develop my writing over time.
Excellent. Um, I read that you are a curator, an editor, a selector, and I wonder how has that changed or influenced your own process of creation?
Um, I I've appreciated collaboration a whole lot more now and
Mm.
being more compassionate also when it comes to my work, because having to review other people's work, I have to understand them and understand who they are. And so being careful not to be too judgmental, but instead asking questions about, oh, what was going on in their mind? What was they thinking when they were writing this? And so it allows me to also be compassionate towards my work and
Mm,
like, what was I thinking when I was writing this? And not to be too harsh on myself, because sometimes I can be my own like worst critic about
mm.
so, and also I learn a lot from reading other people's work as well. I discover new things, new ideas. Um, People will write about things that I didn't know about, and then I'll go on one of those tangents and research more about that. So, yeah.
Um, can you tell us about your process? Do you write every day?
Mhm.
What, when inspiration strikes you? Tell
Um,
us a bit about your process.
so it's a little bit of both. Um, I try to journal every day. I have a
Mm,
lot of journals, and so
mm,
what I do is I try not to like fit what I'm writing into a box
mm,
or like a formal poem. I just take down notes. Whatever like
mm.
catches my attention or whatever I want to look up more later, I just immediately write it down and I come back to it later and then try to structure it. Sorry, try to structure it into something. And sometimes it will be like I'll review some of my notes or an idea will pop into my head and then I will sit there for a few hours and write a whole poem unexpectedly. So it can be either or.
Are you a pen and paper person? Are you a computer person? Are you a dictaphone kind of person or a text to speech person?
Um, I am with journaling, I'm more of a pen and paper person, but when I'm drafting my poems and finishing them and revising them, I tend to work with the computer.
Mhm.
And I sometimes when I need to take notes and the ideas are coming out too fast, I will sometimes dictate the notes down so I can get it all out because I won't be able to write it fast enough. So it's a mix of all three.
One of the poems you shared with us um, was a letter. Do
Mhm.
you follow any forms? What do you feel about forms in terms of your poetry, shaping your poetry? Do you use them, don't use them? How do you feel?
Um, I tend to be experimental with forms. Sometimes I will use older forms. Like I wrote a ghazal poem once about Bert Williams, who was
Hmm.
a blackface
Dancer. Hmm.
performer. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
An
sometimes
entertain an
an
entertainer.
entertainer, yeah. Um, so sometimes I will use older forms, but sometimes I will
Mm.
get creative and use forms that are unexpected. Like one of my poems, I use the resume format to create a poem.
Ah, I
So,
like that idea.
so I will use different kinds of forms to create a poem.
What was the job being sought?
Um,
Just curious.
I think it was kind of like applying for blackness in general and the idea that like
That sounds funny.
what it means to be black because like being of Caribbean descent sometimes like the stereotypical ideas of blackness I don't relate to, so like this idea of like figuring out what blackness is, so I was applying for blackness.
I can relate. I'm I'm second generation and it's month's ration and Jamaican.
Mm,
So I feel you. Um,
mm,
let me share a comment from the audience because we are now out of time. This went so fast. We could talk for another hour, but I'm going to be good. Um, the audience member said, beautiful, melodious, intentional, and impactful. Thank you, Sherese, for these needed poetic missives in this time that we live.
Oh,
And I
thank you,
second that.
Adina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for sharing that because I certainly feel that way. You are just so wonderful and energetic and peacemaking and truth telling, even as you examine these difficult histories. The way in which you interrogate them is just such a blossoming at the same time. It's like, okay, I'm not going to grieve in this moment. I'm going to learn. And I love that you lead us in that way. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, all of our listeners. I thank you, everyone who participated in this wonderful series. It's just been a joy to hear these many voices. And Sherese, what a lovely way for us to conclude. So peace to you all and well-being. And I hope healing for our world. May we ascend, may we evolve, may we do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.